old official GED tests that I go back to every once in a while for some different types of questions. They're just a little bit different than questions from the Kaplan book, so it's always a little bit of a nice change. All right, so with that said, let's get to it. Some of the questions I've got planned for this class are pretty reading intensive, so I'll do my best to zoom in, but I'll also, of course, try to give you enough time to read on your own. But I will just kind of see how we do. So if hopefully you're on a computer. If you are, then you should be able to read this. If not, I'll read through it. So these 4 questions, 9 through 12, that we're going to start, talk about Christopher Columbus. So here's the topic. We didn't specifically go over. Right? We talked about exploration and colonialization and all of that kind of stuff, but we didn't really dive into Columbus, right? So that's okay, right? Don't assume that you're not going to get these questions right just because it's not something we went over, right? So if you're just joining us, we're just going to review U.S. history one more day and look at some questions from an old GED test. And then next week, we will start up on Tuesday with economics. Remember, we don't have classes Monday, so looking for classes Monday, you will be down. Take Monday off, and we will be back Tuesday pumping out new classes. So with that said, let's review some U.S. history. All right, so I'll go ahead and read this whole big blurb here. And while I'm doing that, if you want to read it to yourself or put me on mute and read it, that's fine too. But I'll read it in case if you can't see. So this passage is 4 different speakers, right? So speaker A, B, C, and D. So speaker A says, Christopher Columbus was a genuine hero in history. He discovered America for Europe and opened a new world of peoples, resources, art, philosophy, and science. Columbus found not only a new geographic place, but also a new world of knowledge and experience. He started an enormous westward expansion of Europeans to North and South America, one of the greatest movements of people in history. Okay. So, Speaker A's point of view is pretty clear. Okay, let's read Speaker B and see how it varies or how it compares. Speaker B says many Latin Americans are torn between pride in their European Spanish heritage and outrage at some of the Europeans' dealings with Native and African Americans. Columbus and the European explorers took Indian lands and enslaved Indians. The Europeans also brought new religions, new technologies, and new industries to the Americas. Okay. Speaker C, Columbus started the wave of European expansion that destroyed our traditional way of life and very nearly destroyed our people. He and his successors brought diseases that killed many of our people. Europeans exploited natural resources without regard for environmental effects. Our youth need to realize the real war is now. We are losing who we are and have been for hundreds of years. It's time for us to choose our own road. Okay? And Speaker D lastly says, not all groups are going to feel the same way about Columbus, but I think it is fair to say that Columbus is worthy to be called a great explorer because he introduced an old world to a new one. He started a long historical process of settlement that would eventually produce the democratic system that we still hold on to today, even though that system wasn't and still isn't perfect. All right, so 4 different speakers talking about Columbus, 4 different points of view. Okay, so number 9 says, what is the main issue that these different points of view address? Okay, what is the main issue that these different points of view? 1, reasons why Columbus explored the Americas. 2, effects of Columbus's arrival in the Americas. 3, effects of Native American cultures on European societies. 4, ecological policies of Europeans and Native Americans. 5, accomplishments of Native American civilization. Okay, so again, we're looking for the main issue that these 4 speakers are addressing. Okay, so out of those 5, I can pick at least 2 or 3 that are pretty clearly going to be wrong. Okay. 5, accomplishments of Native American civilizations. This passage isn't focused on Native Americans. There is mention of lots of Native Americans in the passage, and even one of the speakers appears to be a Native American. Like, they're talking about it from a Native American point of view, but the main issue is dealing with Columbus, right? So number 5 is one I would throw out right away. Number 3, for the same reason, effects of Native American cultures on European society, right? Not so much, right? It's not, those things are mentioned, and if it was flipped around, maybe it would be even closer to the right answer, but again, this passage is dealing with Columbus, not Native American, right? That's not the main focus. So 3 I'd throw out, and then probably the last one I would throw out would be number 4, ecological policies of Europeans and Native Americans. There's a little bit of talk about it, but certainly not to the extent where I would call it the main issue. So it's really down to 1 and 2. So between those two, what do you think feels like the best answer? 1, reasons why Columbus explored the Americas, or 2, effects of Columbus's arrival in the Americas. So do these passages deal more with why he came, or what happened as a result of him coming? Right? Much more the second, right? It doesn't really talk about why he chose to set out to find America, or didn't, but it doesn't talk about reasons why he explored. It talks about what happened because he found it, right? So number 2 is the right answer. So if that was obvious, then you don't need to spend that much time on it. But again, always be looking for an edge to give yourself to make questions easier to answer and give yourself a better shot at getting it. If I could sum up how I feel about test taking and the GED test in general into one statement, that would be it, right? Just give yourself the best chance you can to get as many questions right as you can. All right, so number 10. Number 10 says, which action would speaker C most likely support? All right, so speaker C is the speaker who appears to be talking from a Native American point of view. I'm not going to read the whole thing again, but Columbus started the wave of European expansion that destroyed our traditional way of life. Talking about it, personally, destroyed our way of life, which leads me to believe it's probably a Native American. Okay, so again, we're looking for what action would speaker C most likely support, just based on the tone and his or her particular point of view. So number 1, Native Americans filing suit for the return of traditional lands. 2, private corporations leasing mineral rights on reservations. 3, Native American children learning English instead of their native language. 4, Native Americans moving from reservations to urban centers. Or 5, Native Americans exploiting natural resources. Okay. So I would say the answer stands out pretty clearly, and it stands out because in the very end of the paragraph, right, speaker C's paragraph here, they say, our youth need to realize the war is now. We are losing who we are and have been for hundreds of years. It's time for us to choose our own roads. Okay, so that implies to me that this person thinks that Native Americans should embrace their heritage and fight for traditional values as opposed to adapting to new and European. I maybe didn't say that as eloquently as they did, but in general, that's the tone I get from reading it, right? So of these 5 things, only 1 seems to be in that vein. In other words, that kind of goes along with that same point of view, right? Number 2, private corporations leasing mineral rights on reservations. That doesn't sound like something this speaker would agree with. 3, Native American children learning English instead of their native language. Again, just based on the tone of the passage, Doesn't seem like necessarily something they would support either. 4, Native Americans moving from reservations to urban centers? No. 5, Native Americans exploiting natural resources? No. Right? The only one that really jumps out as making any sense to me is number 1, Native Americans filing suit for the return of traditional lands. If you're not sure what filing suit means, it's still possible you could get that right just by ruling out the other 4, because the other 4 don't fall in line at all with what the speaker is saying, and how the speaker seems to be portraying herself, right? All right. Let's see, we're doing good on time. Number 11, on which fact do all the speakers agree? Okay, so we obviously know all 4 speakers have very different points of view and probably don't agree on much. So I'm guessing, before even looking at this question, the answer is going to be obvious. Let's see, maybe it's not. Okay, the fact to which all speakers agree. Columbus, 1, brought democracy to the Americas. 2, was the first to discover the Americas. 3, was a great moral leader. 4, treated Native Americans unjustly. 5, caused changes in history. Okay, so the first thing that I would go into this question thinking is, okay, these 4 speakers are very different, right? So there's not going to be much they agree on. So I'm going to be on the lookout for something that's pretty general or pretty vague, right? Because something very specific is probably not going to be something that they agree on, right? And what I mean by that is something like number 3 or 4, right? Was a great moral leader. That's very specific and certainly not the viewpoint of all of those speakers. Maybe A, but probably not any of the other 3 would agree with that, right? So that's too specific of a thing. Number 4, treated Native Americans unjustly. That, again, is something that probably most people would agree, but we can't assume that based on the tone of Speaker A. Speaker A feels very positively about Columbus. So he or she may not agree with number 4. So even though it sounds plausible that 4 could be the right answer, we don't want to assume that, because just based on the tone of the different speakers, we can't assume Speaker A would agree with that. Okay, so throw out 3 and 4. 1, brought democracy to the Americas. 2, was the first to discover the Americas. 5, caused changes in history. I'd rule out number 1, brought democracy to the Americas. That's not necessarily something all the speakers would agree on, and it's only mentioned by 1 speaker, I think. Speaker D mentions tying in Columbus to democracy somehow, which is pretty big, right? But that's not the point of the question. So I'd rule it down to 2 and 5. Was the first to discover the Americas, and 5, caused changes in history. Now be careful here, right? Would Speaker C, right, the Native American point of view, would they agree that Columbus was the first to discover the Americas? No, they probably wouldn't, right? So really the only thing they can agree on is number 5. Columbus caused changes in history, right? So again, it's not the most exciting answer, and it's the most vague. It can apply to the most things. Sometimes when you have a question like this, and when the speakers have such different points of view, those vague answers are often the right, because they're the only ones that can apply to everything, all right? So the last question on this, and then we'll move on to a new chunk of history review questions. All right, it has to deal with Speaker D. So number 12 says, what information would help most to prove the truth of Speaker D's statement that Columbus started a process that produced a democratic system? All right, so kind of what we were just talking about. What information would help most to prove that that was true? 1, the death rate of Native Americans in the 1500s. 2, the number of Native American religions practices observed today. 3, the extent of the spread of representative government in the Americas. 4, the number of schools and universities founded by European explorers. Or 5, the intermarriage rates of Europeans and Indians. Okay, so if none of these statements were mentioned anywhere, but if one of them were, which one would help prove Speaker D's point that Columbus actually started a process that produced democracy? Which again is a stretch, but if one of these things were to be mentioned, which one would support that idea the most? Well, again, where do you see, you don't see democracy, you see representative government, which is a sneaky way of saying democracy. So 1, 2, 4, and 5, again, don't deal with government or don't deal with anything related to democracy at all. So number 3, the extent of the spread of representative government in the Americas is the only one that makes any sense. Okay? All right, let's move on to a new batch of questions. And like I said, if you're just joining us, we're spending one more day reviewing U.S. history. And then next week on Tuesday, not Monday, we will start up on economics. And just as a side note, before I forget, just because I'm reminded by one of our students who just joined us that successfully passed a GED test recently, so congratulations. I just want to mention to everyone that we need to make sure we're staying up on taking our practice. Usually when we're in person, that's something that I focus on a lot, and it's like hasn't been in my mind at all. So as you're going through these classes, for as much as some of you have been in class, don't go more than 2 weeks without trying to practice test, right? Because we really want to push you to start making some progress. And so if you don't know how to get practice test codes, ask us. It's easy. You can request them through the website. We can get them for you. So just make sure you're doing that. That was just a side thing that I had in the back of my head that I wanted to mention. So, because that's the only way you're going to make progress, right? Just going to class every day is awesome, but you got to push yourself to keep taking practice tests so that you can see if you're actually moving in the right direction. And if you're not, then that gives us some feedback of, well, maybe we need to work on some other stuff or work on things differently. So that's the end of my side tangent. Take practice tests, get on it. I'm going to try to remember to harass you more often about it so that we can keep moving in the right direction and get some GEDs out of here. Huh? Sound good? All right, back to the questions. Let's do number 14 and 15. They're kind of a weird roundabout question, not really related to U.S. history, but kind of. Okay? So numbers 14 and 15 refer to this little advertisement. Okay, the advertisement is titled Empires of American Industry Set. So the little blurb says 1996, the History Channel will take you on a tour of the brewing, steel, coal, shipbuilding, and textile industries shaped industrial America and continue to influence contemporary American culture. Leading academics, historians, and industrialists discuss the history and economic roles of these industries in the past and the present. Okay, and then there's all the other information on it. Okay, but let's just go with that. So the first question deals with the content itself, right? What I just read. And the question says, which of the following best summarizes the content of the videos described in the advertisement? We're looking for the best summary of that whole thing. Number 1, comments by famous industrialists about U.S. history. 2, tours of steel and coal industries. 3, history and current status of several major U.S. industries. 4, economic role of the coal and textile industries in the United States today. Or 5, current issues in the brewing and shipbuilding industry. Okay? So, again, alarm bells, red flag, right? If you hear best summarizes, I'm going to be looking for something broad, something general, right? Anything that has very specific things, I'm going to be hesitant about and I'm going to think is probably wrong, right? Like number 2, tours of steel and coal industries. Steel and coal is only are only two of the things mentioned. They mention a lot more. So a summary isn't going to only include, right, two of the industries. Same with number 4, coal and textile. Same with number 5, brewing and shipbuilding. Those 3 I'd throw out right away because they don't mention all of the industries mentioned in the thing. And so a summary, a good summary, is going to include everything, right? And those 3 just have little select groups of the industries mentioned, so they're not the best summary. So that leaves us with 1 and 3. Comments by famous industrialists about U.S. history, or 3, history and current status of several major U.S. industries. Okay, what sounds like the best summary there? Is the main point of the video series comments by famous people? No. The main point of the video series seems to be number 3, history and current status of several major U.S. industries, right? The fact it just says several means it includes kind of everything without specifically naming them. There's your answer, all right? Let's look at number 15. Number 15 is a little bit different. 14 looks at the content. 15 kind of throws a curveball at you, and kind of asks this is like a question you might expect to see on the reading test. Number 15 says, based on the advertisement, what does the History Channel appear to assume about its video consumer market? Okay. What are they assuming about the people that are seeing this advertisement that are going to buy the video? Number 1, consumers no longer consider manufacturing an economic priority. 2, consumers want to buy videos made in the early 20th century. 3, consumers want to become multimillionaires. 4, consumers are attracted to new products and discounted prices. Or number 5, consumers know a great deal about the shipbuilding and textile industries. Okay? So it's hard for me because I've done these questions a fair amount, and so the answer kind of jumps out at me right away. But that's mostly because I've done this, right? So let's go through and weed out the really silly ones. Number 3, consumers want to become multimillionaires. Well, yeah, everyone would love that, right? But that's not something that answers the question. That doesn't tie into what the History Channel seems to assume about the people that are buying the videos. Okay? So number 3 is a throwaway for sure, right? I'd probably throw out number 1. Consumers no longer consider manufacturing an economic priority. Okay, well, they probably consider it some kind of a priority because they're buying videos about the history of making stuff in America. So number 1 seems like a false answer, and it doesn't seem great anyway. So that leaves us with 2, consumers want to buy videos made in the early 20th century. Okay. 4, consumers are attracted to new products and discounted prices. Or number 5, consumers know a great deal about shipbuilding and textile. Okay. Number 5 doesn't make sense because they don't necessarily assume the customers know about those. They're assuming the customers want to find out about those industries. And also number 2 is silly because consumers don't care when the videos were made. There is mention the video was made in 1996. Right? But other than that, that's all that they mention. So what's left, consumers are attracted to new products and discounted prices, right? The fact they have this big thing that says new release, this big thing that says save $19, that's, from a marketing standpoint, that's what they're looking at. That's what they're going off. So number 4 is the right answer. Okay? We got 5 minutes left. Let me pull up. What questions? I'm going to shift gears slightly. So this isn't really a U.S. history question. I was going to do all 4 of these questions based on this chart and this paragraph, but with 4 minutes left, that's a lot to get into, and let's not go down that. Be that cruel. So let's just do this last question. It's a good question in terms of kind of it uses some graph knowledge and that kind of, and asks you to kind of apply some of that. So let's just do this. So this final question here says is a visual aid with a graph that says population growth in selected areas of the world, and it has the United States, West Africa, Brazil, East Africa, North Africa, Southern Africa, Germany, Central Africa. Kind of a random smattering of different places. Okay? And then there's a little visual aid that says Africa in perspective. And it has a map of Africa with the map of the United States laid over it to show you that when it comes to area, Africa is 3.2 times as big as the United States, right? You can fit 3 and a little bit more Americas, right, within the map of Africa. And then it says Africa population. Africa is 2.8 times more populous than the United States. Okay. So let's read the question. And I guess we should maybe read the little blurb here. It says the population growth for North Africa and slightly less populous Southern Africa almost coincide, differing by less than 2 million in 1960 and less than 1 million in 2000. So they're just saying North Africa and Southern Africa, there's 2 lines there, but they're almost identical. So that's maybe going to be something that's helpful to know, maybe not. And so the question says, which of the following statements about Africa's status at the end of the 20th century is confirmed by the information provided above? So first we need to know what the end of the 20th century means, right? So the 1900s are considered the 20th century, so 2000 would be the end of the 20th century. Okay? We're looking for what statement about Africa's status at this point here, at the end of the graph, is confirmed. 1, population growth rates were lowest in East and West Africa. Okay. Here's population in millions. Here's years, right? So we have East Africa, West Africa. So I would say that one definitely is not right, okay? Population growth rates were lowest. No, I wouldn't agree with that. 2, population size varied among regions in Africa. Okay, that sounds like a plausible answer, right? We've got Central Africa, Southern and North Africa, West Africa, and they're kind of all over the place. So 2 seems all right. 3, African nations had the same urban-rural population distribution. Is there anything on here about rural and urban? No, just population in general, population in millions. So 3's not right. 4, Africa's size was too small to support future population growth. We know it's 3 times as big as the United States and only has 2.8 times the amount of people, so that doesn't make sense. And number 5, the average per capita income in Africa was 2.8 times greater than the average U.S. per capita income. Don't confuse per capita with population, right? There's nothing on here that shows anything about income or people making money. The only one that is even close to being right is number 2. Population size varied among regions in Africa. Easy as that. Okay? So that was a lot of practice questions. Move on to a new topic with more discussion and less practice questions on Tuesday. And remember, no classes on Monday. And with that said, if I don't see any of you in science, have a nice weekend. Have a nice long Memorial Day weekend. Hopefully get out and enjoy some nice weather. And with that, I will say goodbye. All right. See ya, everybody.